The Passover Parable. The ancient Egyptian burial ritual and the Egyptian theological concepts concerning the death and resurrection of the Pharaoh combined to provide the basis for the parabolic pantomime of the Passover parable that Moses conducted at God's behest. In directing the parabolic pantomime of the Exodus and the wilderness wandering of the sons of Israel who came out of Egypt, God intentionally conducted much more than just a symbolic mimicry of the Pharaoh's burial procession. It was a mocking, taunting denial of all that pious Egyptians believed concerning the certainty of the Pharaoh's resurrection to a new life after death and their own resurrection in him. Focusing his wrath on the ancients' beliefs concerning resurrection, God first told Moses to publicly proclaim to the Pharaoh that corporate Israel, not their famed god Osiris, was the firstborn of the God who is. Exodus 4:22 and 23. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, Thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I said to you, Let my son go, that he may serve me. But you have refused to let him go. Behold, I will kill your son, your firstborn. In having Moses make this declaration to the king of Egypt, God was announcing that he, not Osiris, was the supreme ruler of the realm beyond. That proclamation was intended as a direct challenge to the Pharaoh's divinity as Horus, son of Osiris. But then God demonstrated through a graphic symbolic ritual, the parabolic pantomime of the Passover parable, that all Israel was the firstborn of the God who rules over the dead. He did that by destroying all of the firstborn in Egypt except Israel. This happened at midnight, at precisely the time when the Egyptians thought the ritual killing of the firstborn took place in the realm of the dead. It is obvious that all Israel together is considered to be God's firstborn, since Moses sternly warns the sons of Israel that, Exodus 12:22 and 23, None of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. Why would every member of Israel have to stay inside a house when only the firstborn males in the land of Egypt were being killed? The youngest female child in a family of Israel should not have been threatened by the destroyer. She could never be a firstborn male. The reason she was threatened is because all Israel collectively, not individually, was God's firstborn. Therefore, any member of corporate Israel would qualify as part of the firstborn targeted by the destroyer. It was just as Moses told Pharaoh. Exodus 4:22, Israel is my son, my firstborn. The deceased Pharaoh is depicted as the god Osiris, lying in his funeral coffer beside the erica tree. The goddesses Nephthys and Isis stand at either end as the protector goddesses of coffins and canopic jars. The erica tree represents the flourishing of the god Osiris in the resurrection. Different kinds of trees were planted around the pyramid complex as symbolic representation of the Pharaoh's resurrection and new life on the mountain of God. The resurrected king was thought to dwell on the mountain of God in the garden of God as the tree of life. The belief that the soul of the deceased came back to life in a tree was prevalent throughout the ancient Near East. The soul of the deceased was thought to live in a tree planted by the tomb. Sacred groves and stone slabs, the original tombstones, were often associated with the worship of the dead. The prophets of God condemned the sons of Israel for engaging in such idolatrous worship. Jeremiah is the most direct, condemning them. Who say to a tree, You are my father, and to a stone, You gave me birth? Jeremiah 2:27. After the annihilation of the firstborn proved that Israel alone was the divine firstborn of the firstborn who qualified for resurrection, God presented himself to the sons of Israel as the divine guide that corporate Israel needed to show him the right way through the realm of the dead. And just as Egyptian theology stated, by following the guidance that God provided, corporate Israel soon came to the Sea of Reeds. Many students of the Bible are not aware that the original text of the Scriptures states that Israel crossed the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea. That's because the designation Red Sea has maintained its currency in translation since it first appeared in the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Yet it could hardly have been in the original Hebrew, since even the Latin Vulgate has the correct Sea of Reeds translation. Speculation abounds as to what body of water the sons of Israel actually crossed when coming out of Egypt. It is not my purpose here to propose a definitive answer. Whatever or wherever the Sea of Reeds was, it was obviously one of the many sacred lakes throughout Egypt that symbolically represented the Sea of Reeds in the underworld. That is demonstrated by the fact that God tells Moses to, Exodus 14:2, camp in front of Baal-zephon, opposite it, by the sea. Baal-zephon can hardly be anything but a sacred area dedicated to the Canaanite god Baal, a god who, like Osiris, was believed to have died and risen again. The second part of the compound, Zephon, is actually the name of Baal's mountain, Zaphon. That fact indicates there was a mountain, or at least a small rise that could represent a mountain, in the vicinity of the symbolic Sea of Reeds that corporate Israel crossed as he parabolically followed the way through the realm of the dead. That mountain was intended to represent symbolically the cosmic mountain of God, belonging to the god Baal, which lay beyond the Sea of Reeds in the realm of the dead. In accordance with the unique Egyptian theological tradition concerning the deceased's crossing of the Sea of Reeds, God parted the waters so that the sons of Israel were able to pass through unharmed. Yet God did not continue the parabolic pantomime of the Passover Parable at Baal-zephon, the mountain of the god Baal, the Canaanite god of the resurrection. That was associated with the sacred Sea of Reeds Israel had just crossed. Instead, God ignored that mountain and led the sons of Israel on to Mount Sinai, a mountain in the desert that represented his own mountain, the cosmic mountain of God on which the ancients believed the Canaanite god El dwelt. In bypassing Baal-zephon, the mountain of Baal, God also dismissed Baal's claim to the title of God of the resurrection. He would later, through the prophets, make much of this initial contemptuous affront to Baal's power and ability to effect the resurrection on behalf of his worshippers. But at the time of the Exodus, it was enough to simply ignore the patron deity of the sacred Sea of Reeds, through which he had just parabolically led his people, Israel.